any wargame, anytime.
Well, hello everyone. It is a very special episode today of the Any War Game Anytime podcast for two reasons. One, it's been a bit of a turbulent year. It's just life, and the first full podcast that me, Bozz, and Sam have been able to get together on and get and do it together. So,
Hooray. Yay.
yeah. And like I said, we're both of them individually have been hunting down that millionaire to, let us do this full time. But till
Yeah,
that time,
no luck so far, guys.
no luck so
Yeah,
far.
they are slippery. They can
Well,
run.
so Boz, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. As you say, life's very busy, but I've been doing something interesting this past week. I've been playing a lot of Helldivers too, like about half the general population at the moment, and I found some really cool STLs. So I've printed out a 1,500 point list for OPR that I'm actually going to debut this Wednesday. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Oh, that sounds so cool. That sounds so cool. Sam, how you doing, man?
Oh, not too bad. Just, living the life, one day at a time sometimes.
Oh, I think we all I think all of us know that. Yeah. For myself, I've been actually I taught a game of OPR this past weekend to a new guy who's an ex 40K player, and like it's honestly so invigorating just to see that person click, to see that person who's just been like beaten down by 40K and to just play a game of OPR. And he was literally like, so I did an introductory game and then a full game. He's like, let's play another one. And I'm like, well, so, and that's great. Like, I love that. Like, it is so good just to see the lights come on for people. So,
Absolutely.
kind
My
of
uh
happy
my
about that.
my local group, it's been three of us for the last couple of months, and in the last few weeks we've got two, potentially three new players, and just from people kind of hearing about it, coming to have a look and going, "Oh, this looks much more simpler. Where's the rules?" And you hand them the one page, and they go,
Mhm.
"Oh, it's amazing."
Yeah. I just and we played two games, and I think it was like under 2 hours, I think. So yeah, that was really cool. But we also have returning guests, and really we want this to be a kind of a semi-regular series that we are tentatively calling Game Designer Corner, patent pending, from Boz, who's
Or
christened that
or
one.
or until we find a better name.
Yeah,
Well, I like Game Designer Corner, but the guy he's been on before.
it'll do for now.
Yeah, Jacob Hampton. He's been on before. Super cool guy. Very in depth. Jacob, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, keeping busy, very, very busy. My boy just actually had his first birthday just
Hey,
last
Oh,
week. Very,
Congratulations.
very busy.
yes. I know that. And so to give a little background here, we had that first episode with Jacob, and like a lot of these episodes, he just started saying things that were just it was you really had to time box it. We had to sort of say, we couldn't he explained some things, but like it's one of those conversations about game design, especially coming from a person who's a professional game designer, that like there's so many like things you could talk about. So we sort of want to have him come on and sort of, periodically come on and break down some aspects of game design. But before that, Jacob, what games are you playing right now?
Well, right now, I'm playing a lot of Star Wars Legion, a bit of War Machine Mark IV, and I just tried Marvel Crisis Protocol for the first time, and I'm pretty hooked on that one too, to be honest. Then outside of war games, I'm getting into there's a card game called Universes I've been trying out, and there's a board game I'm playing with my wife, Descent: Legends of the Dark, just kind of like an
Oh,
RPG in a
yes,
box. Um,
yes.
and I'm speaking of RPGs, I'm big into RPGs, so I'm GMing a group every Wednesday night now and poking around with a few systems. So,
Man, you are living the life right here. Yeah, Descent is great. I've been, yeah, so, Jacob is in the Austin Alternative Gaming Freaks, and I've been seeing War Machine being played, and I may try it out. It's been since Mark II, so I've heard good things about Mark IV. Yeah, any particular game you want to kind of just talk, anything that sort of, as far as a game designer, sort of piques your fancy about some of these games you're playing.
hmm. Well, from a purely game design perspective, if I had to just kind of like analyze, dissect these things, I would say Legion and Marvel Crisis Protocol I like mainly for the same reason. They're narratively satisfying.
Mm.
When you sit down and I put Darth Vader on the field, you kind of know what Darth Vader's going to do to any rebel scum that get in his way. He's Darth Vader. My stormtroopers are so afraid of him, they don't even consider running away. So, it's got that very strong narrative theme. And Marvel Crisis Protocol, same thing. If you're into Marvel, you kind of know these superheroes. You know what Thor's about to do to you when you've made him angry. So narratively, those games are really satisfying. War Machine, I've been playing a fair bit. I'm having a lot of fun with it. Every edition of War Machine has had some issues, and then I feel like War Machine's trying to be two games in one. It's trying to be a assassination game that's all about getting the right angle and taking out the enemy caster, and that means you win. But it also has these very deep, complex rules about objectives and scoring points. It's kind of like, well, 9 times out of 10, those points don't matter. And I almost wish assassination was just gone from that game, which I know is a controversial take among that community, but I wish it was just gone. But I do enjoy it. I have far too much War Machine. I have about 800 points of Scorn, which
Wow.
you've played, 50 to 75 points is all you really need. So yeah, I have a lot of very angry Imperials from the East. So I'm enjoying it. I am. Like I said, it's very fun, even if I don't think it's a perfect game.
It is, yeah. I had my War Machine days, and I'm looking forward to trying Mark IV, but I needed a break after Mark II because Mark II was just,
I
boy,
was
oh
the
boy.
exact same. I
Yeah.
didn't play a single game of Mark III.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's that bad.
Just-
It's like,
yeah, I was really into Mark II, got into the competitive scene, and then just kind of needed to take a break from the game for a while.
I know the exact feeling. You have as a game designer, any particular cool projects you've been working on lately? What's sort of been going on in the game design shop?
Well, I've primarily been in tabletop RPG land recently because I have a module coming out for one of my RPGs. That's Freelancer Skies Over Tolindia is the RPG. The module is called The Vanishing Airship, where passenger liner goes missing and you have to track down the missing people and everything that was on it. So that's been consuming a lot of my time. But my part in that is pretty much done now. It's up to people to proofread and kind of lay it out and get it looking pretty. So I'm back onto other projects. I do have a few tabletop wargaming projects I'm working on, and since this is a wargaming podcast, I feel like those are the ones to talk about. One is Deep Patrol, which I've actually play tested here in Austin with some of our local group. It's a multiplayer game. It's all about not being 1v1, but always being the more players, the better. Where most of the players are heroic dwarves fighting to reclaim their lost hold, and the other player is the Deep, or the evil overlord, who's throwing monsters and goblins and hordes of gribbly things at them. I'm actually going to be pitching that one to publishers pretty soon, so wish me luck on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, hopefully someone picks it up. That'd be fantastic. If not, it'll go back to the shop, get tinkered with, and pitched again in a new form someday. The other game I've started development on is one I don't think we talked about it on the podcast before, but I know I've talked to in private with you guys about it, and that is Headball, the ball game without a ball. So it's kind of all the cues of those cheesy 80s movies set in the distant year 2000, where it's an ultra-violent sports game where the only way to get a ball is to chop off someone's head and run that into the goal. So think of it like basketball, except obviously traveling's okay. And each team has one gigantic cybernetic guy with a two-handed axe. It's got a unique activation system I'm really excited about. It's been leading to some really interesting play. But now it needs the spice. It needs all those little things that make a game special, and the long process of playtesting and balancing is what awaits me on that one. But I need to focus on my pitching of Deep Patrol first, but maybe soon I'll be able to bring that one out and have us playtest that one locally.
Absolutely. Have you got a playtesting team for it currently, or are you just doing most of it yourself at this point?
It's been an internal testing, which
Yep.
means myself, a couple of friends only. And
Very, very tight in.
yeah, very, very basic kind of stuff right now. Because just I don't want to hand a mess to anyone and be like, hey, try it out. I'll
Yeah,
hand a mess to my friends and be like, figure it out, make it work. Let's talk about this. What did you like? What didn't you? But it's not quite ready for a more open playtest. It will be soon. I'm guessing within a couple of months. I also have some other projects on the back burner, but they're early stages. I got a cyberpunk one I'm kind of excited about.
Mhm.
That's kind of all I've got cooking there.
War game or
Also-
RPG?
That would be a war game as well.
Oh, sorry, Dan.
Yeah, so I RPG projects, I've got a couple as well that I'm not at liberty to discuss because those are already lined up with publishers, NDAs, and things like that.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you as soon as I can.
Isn't it so cool you have some person who's like, I can't discuss that because it's like that is cool. No, that's really cool.
It makes us sound way more legit, right?
Exactly. You heard it here first, folks. There's stuff we cannot talk about.
Well, like I said, I won't. He's covered some details about Headball with us that we'll let Jacob. But needless to say, that's the game that like when he spoke about it, I am like super excited about Headball. Like the concept itself. And like I said, I'll let Jacob, whatever he wants to reveal, that's on him. But needless to say, I'm excited about Headball. I think it's super cool.
Go back and listen to episode 7, listeners. That's last time we had Jacob on, and I think we did touch on Headball during that episode.
We did, because you brought it up as the first game you ever designed back in
Yes,
college. Like you
that's
designed a simple version of that. I remember that's when it came up, and Dan got really into it and told you should
Yeah.
you
I'm
should
still
make an
into it.
updated version of that.
We'll
I
keep-
actually,
we'll just keep
I have the
teasing until you
original.
do.
Sorry, I have the original piece of paper I wrote those rules on in a college cafeteria right over my desk here. So
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
it's spun off a bit now. Your teams of clones, and you can pump them full of different stimulants to modify the way each of them works. And
It feels, yeah, it feels also even a little cyberpunkish. That is definitely something that would be in the cyberpunk universe.
yeah, I'm going for that kind of schlocky sci-fi vibe for sure.
Mhm.
I think I said it's set in the distant year of like 2010 or something like that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Distant
Yeah.
dark future 2010.
Gives me big Salute of the Jugger vibes. I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's the far future of 2001 or 2 or whatever. And
I mean, I'll say Running Man was definitely a big
Yeah.
inspiration for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. Well, and that's the reason we wanted to kind of have Jacob on, because as a game designer, Jacob, this is something you think like your job, every
Mhm.
part of it. And there's obviously a lot of parts of the game design that you know about. Like I said, I'm sure the business side of it, there's like NDAs and all this stuff we don't, but also just designing games. You're in this headspace constantly. And we wanted to sort of for people who, even if it's a hobby, developing your own games or developing parts of game. I think every one of us who's a war gamer always fancied themselves, oh, I would love to work on a game and develop a game. So maybe kind of give us some basic tutorials to kind of help us walk through some things that in the game as a game designer you see maybe in a different setting. So I think, and this is something we're not really, we could just kind of let Jacob take liberty to sort of approach this conversation however he sees fits. But he was telling me, Jacob, that you sort of want to start out at sort of the simplicity, complexity. Would we say
Mhm.
like what would- like a what's the word, like from one
Spectrum.
end spectrum? Thank you. I'm sorry, from spectrum.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, so go ahead and maybe talk about that and how that sort of affects players, right? We hear these terms a lot, but maybe flesh them out for us and kind of, so yeah, I'll give the floor to you, Jacob, with that terrible introduction. So
Thank you. Thank you for the floor. I'll be able to handle from here, I think. So complexity and simplicity is definitely something we hear a lot, and as game designers, we discuss it a lot. There's a lot of different kind of nicknames for these things, like complexity. Sometimes called crunch. Um, but complexity, the idea is just having a lot of moving parts in your game. So there's a lot of different special rules, unique abilities, out of activation timing on things. Maybe, for example, stratagems in 40K are much more complex than a system that doesn't have these kind of, oh, wait, it's my shooting phase. I'm going to spend 2 of my strategy points to activate this. Um, these are all kind of elements of complexity. Simplicity is the opposite. It's having simple rules, not a lot of special rules. You look at a unit as a straightforward profile, you kind of know what you're getting. A good comparison right now would be Warhammer: The Old World and Kings of War. Neither of these games are at the far ends of either category, but they're kind of a good set to show you a very similar game. They're both fantasy mass battle games, but Old World is much more complex and Kings is much simpler. So Old World, you look at a unit, it has 9 statistics, not counting armor. Uh, Units, every single unit has multiple special rules, from the formation they're allowed to be in to they might have equipment options as well. Then there's things like, oh, I'm playing dwarfs, so I have on just a single dwarf warrior unit, it's like I can do close formation. I have the shield wall special rule. I have the resolute special rule. I have the magic resistance 1 special rule. And that's just your very basic core guy. Whereas in Kings, you have a unit of dwarf warriors. They have 4 statistics. They have their speed, their melee skill, their range skill, and their armor. And for dwarf warriors, their basic ironclads don't even have a range skill. So very straightforward, very simple. Another way to kind of show the complexity is the magic systems in these games. In Old World, you have all these lores of magic, each with 6 spells in the signature. And so it's like, oh, I'm running a Wizard of the Battle Magic lore. Okay. You get these 4 spells, you have to roll them, choose them, and each one of them has very different effects. Whereas in Kings of War, I have a wizard. My wizard knows Zap 5 and Bane Chant 2. And every army that has a wizard pretty much has access to Zap and Bane Chant. They're in the core rulebook. There aren't multiple lores. It's just these are the spells. You might imagine that a goblin casting Zap is firing some, I don't know, fungal blast, whereas an elf wizard casting Zap is calling down lightning, but they work the exact same way on the table. So you can kind of see, hopefully, a little bit of a difference between complexity and simplicity there, where it's just the easiest, most straightforward way to think of it is complexity is a lot of rules, and simplicity is not that many rules.
Mhm.
Um,
And when you say like a lot of rules, I think you're sort of also saying a lot of rules that sort of break the game. Like, here's the base rules.
yes,
You kind of mean rules that are sort of saying, okay, the base rules are this, but we're going to these rules ignore these base rules, basically, right?
that's a great way of thinking of it too. It can just be that there's more base rules. Um, there's a lot more base rules, even just to I put a unit down in Old World versus I put a unit down in Kings of War. Put it down in Kings of War, it's this size. You got it. It's infantry of that size. In Old World, it's I put an infantry unit down. Oh, I got to pick the size of it, so I decided to go 7 wide and 5 deep for this squad. And they're actually in open order formation, but I could put them in close order. I'm not sure which one I'm going to do, and that's just one unit.
Are they drilled? Can I literally reform before I charge and in a
Yeah,
moment change the formation? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I definitely see that where it's
Um, but definitely when you start adding rules like you suggested, where they go against the core rules or they interact specifically with other rules, that is where complexity can really come in. Um, complexity, there's kind of a trap where people think complexity is a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing either. Um, but if complexity serves a purpose, that's great. Um, a decent way of kind of thinking of complexity is your game is on the other side of a river. And if people want to play it, they have to cross that river. Complexity is how wide that river is. How much do they have to get across before they can sit down with your game and be like, oh, okay, this is how it works.
That's a
Um,
beautiful analogy. Did you just come up with that?
I did not know.
Well, I love it. It perfectly kind of puts into words
Yeah.
that whole concept.
Yeah, I think
Um,
about that a lot with board games.
yes.
I was playing a board game with some friends uh, on Friday, and I was like, this is almost at the level of simplicity that I could get my family to play it,
Yeah.
but not quite. But too simple for the kind of game that I tend to like, which is going to be the board games with, I'm one of those weird
Yeah.
people who if I had some friends get together and say this weekend we're going to play Battle for North Africa, I would be like, oh yeah, that sounds great.
Well, we're all war gamers. War gamers in general tend to like more complexity to a point. And I should say neither complexity or simplicity is better than the other from a game design perspective. They target different audiences. But the real point is if you add a rule to your game, you are making it more complex. So that rule better have a purpose. I've seen you guys have probably played some games where it's like half the rules just seem like fluff. They don't really seem necessary. They're overly complex and that it's just
You're like,
uh,
why is this even here?
yeah.
Why is this entry even here? Because it's gonna literally never come up.
Yeah, it's like,
And
oh, it's really cool that my guy's better at climbing, and he moves an extra inch when he's climbing, but this is primarily fought on beaches in this scenario. So where exactly am I going to use climbing very often? You know what I mean? Something like that.
yeah,
It'd be like if in headball, I don't know, I had a rule where, geez, I can't even think of a good example where someone, when they're tackling an enemy player from behind and there's two allies with them and no enemies with them, they get an extra +1 bonus to it's like, why? You're
hmm.
already outnumbering them, you're already hitting them pretty hard. You don't need this niche situation that's rarely going to happen anyways.
that
Um,
that example actually leads me to something. I sometimes I think you also get, and this is something I've talked about, especially in regards to like card games, but it applies to wargaming as well. Is you'll have win more stuff, uh,
yes.
where it's like it's oh well, this special ability, sometimes may even look good on paper, but what you realize is, well, it's already overperforming on the thing that it's supposed to do. You might as well not have it. And
Yeah.
from a wargaming perspective, it becomes an issue because oftentimes that'll be like, well, you're paying extra points for something that's superfluous.
Yes. Winmore is a pretty good comparison, but like kind of a game design version of Winmore. You can have Winmore in your rules, and rules bloat is the biggest struggle for pretty much any designer. Like my tabletop RPG, Freelancer, Skies Over Tolindia, I started work on in 2017, and it released in 2022. So the more you play it, the more you experience, you're like, oh, wait, what about this niche situation? Maybe I should add a rule for that. And then you find yourself writing another page of rules to the book for something that almost never comes up to make it as like perfect as possible. And then you're like, wait, I don't actually need that. And that's kind of what I mean with rules having a purpose. Whenever you add a rule, it needs to have a clear, distinct reason for being there. Designers need to stop and ask, what does this rule actually add to the game? Does it improve the play experience? Does it add anything interesting? Or is this just fluff? Or is this just something kind of meaningless? And I should say the purpose.
And I think you go ahead, Bozz.
I was just going to say it might also be a situation that's so niche that you could just rely on the players to come up with a solution themselves and move on and have it not come up in the next 1,000 hours of gaming anyway.
Yeah. I see that you can definitely see that in RPG design. It's like, oh, well, I want to customize my car in this game. It's like, but you're like never in your car. You don't use it in the actual adventures you're doing. Your car is for around your home-based town, and you park it there and leave it there when you actually go on adventures. I don't need to have pages on how you can decorate your car. Just paint it.
Yeah.
Have the GM could just be like, oh, you wanna customize your car? Okay, how? You want to tint the windows? Yeah, okay, you have tinted windows now. Cost this much.
Is it also like, I know when we talk about complexity, one of the things that I think that you've brought up in our other conversations just personally is just actually just writing the rules. And when I mean writing the rules, I mean describing how the rules actually work in a clear fashion that is succinct, but doesn't like, for me, and this reminds me of that conversation because I've been reading Warhammer, the Old World rules, and the game, like the rules seem simple, but there's just a few really odd clarifications that they move things in different places that, like, I don't know whether it's a simple or complex game because the rules are just so, I hate to be frank, kind of badly written. Like they're not clear, and it's sort of like how does that even kind of, is that even part of it about simplicity? Like even just explaining the rules seems to be interesting.
That is an excellent question, and that connects to actually something I was hoping we get to talk about today, called elegance in game design. So elegance is one of the hardest things to get right as a designer. It's very difficult to make a game that's elegant. But elegance is essentially, okay, I told you about complexity being the width of that river, right? The wider the river, the harder it is to get across it. But if you make an elegant system, the rules are clear. It's like you built a bridge over the river. It doesn't really matter how wide it is. It's clear. So let's kind of, to pin down what elegance is elegance is, rather than how complex the rules is, elegance is how complex the game is to play. So, like you were saying, the rules, the way it's written, can actually be a number one cause of elegance. Little example, let's say I'm making a war game and I want a miniature to be able to glide. They have kind of, they can't fly, but they can glide with their wings. So I could say something like, I don't know, A model with the glide special rule may perform a glide action instead of moving during their turn. To perform a glide action, you must select an unoccupied space X inches away, where X is your character's speed. The location must be at an equal or lower elevation to the location the model is currently standing upon. If they do not move their entire speed, any remaining speed may be moved in inches as a standard movement action. Remove the model performing the glide action from the table, place it in the designated unoccupied location. Wow, okay. Or I could have just said, whenever a model with glide moves, they can ignore models in terrain that are at lower elevation than their starting location. One's a lot simpler to understand. Oh, okay. Whenever I move, I can ignore stuff that's lower down than me. That's easy to remember.
And we've all played games that the first thing was what was written, and then had to
Yep.
rely on somebody we were playing with saying, "Oh, this is what it means."
Hmm.
That actually, I just had a conversation with someone in our club on Saturday. Alan, I don't know if you guys have met him, but he has a kind of local group of friends, and they play BattleTech. And I'm going to paraphrase what he said here, but this is a really good point. It connects to what you were saying, Sam. He plays BattleTech with his friends, and they couldn't figure out the rules. It's very complex. They're having a difficult time figuring it out. And then some fan out there made a flow chart of just, hey, you're performing an attack. Here's the flow chart of how you perform an attack. And when they did that, the rules clicked for them all, and they just started being able to play it without these issues. So,
Yeah, it's interesting that the special rules about breaking the is it those special rules that are the problem, sort of the rules that kind of break the game, that say here are the rules, but here's a special rule that actually does something completely different. Is that like is there a number
yeah.
of those special rules that should go into it, or how does that? I know that's sort of a nebulous question, but it's
Well,
like,
in a sense, you kind of always have to be like that's kind of the nature
yeah.
of a game, right? Is here's the system, uh, here's the rules of the system, here's the way in which you can alter the system, or alter
Yeah.
or break the rules within the system in order to achieve your end. And that's kind of, I think that's just, but what I think what you said that I really appreciated is, uh, if it's well done and elegant, you get into this kind of flow state, where as a player, the game just flows, and it doesn't require, this constant consorting of the rule book or whatnot. Things kind of make, once you have accepted the system and to like internalize the system, it just kind of flows, and it just makes sense and is intuitive.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And one thing that's interesting is it's actually really difficult for any of us. Like it's probably pretty difficult for us to stop and think, what games have I played that I would describe as elegant? But it's very easy for us to think of what games have I played that were not elegant. Um, so for example, when I was trying to think of this because I wanted to give you examples of elegant, but the main thing I can think of is a game that isn't. That would be Flames of War. Have any of you guys played that one? World War II. So if you have played it, it's a fun game. I'm not saying it's a bad game, and if you're a history buff, World War II, it can be a lot of fun. But if you sit through one artillery phase of that game, you realize you're just consulting tables and charts and flipping back and forth through pages, and then add on to the fact that I remember I read through the artillery rules probably a dozen times trying to figure out how they worked, only to get to the table with my buddy and realize that since I was playing as the United States, I had a completely different set of rules that overrode those core rules. Because in World War II, American artillery was done with this different timing system. And I'm like, okay, so I just won't field artillery, I guess. Just not even going to bother fielding artillery. So that's kind of something I can think of as not elegant. Again, that doesn't mean it's a bad game. If you love Flames of War, don't think I'm saying it's a terrible game. But you have to admit the artillery phase is really difficult to get your head around.
I sometimes come across these games And they, as you say, they might otherwise be good, but sometimes I just read the rules and I think someone was really, really keen on letting everyone know that they've got a very wide vocabulary and know how to use it. Like
Yes.
rather than being succinct, it seems like sometimes, certain rules can go out of their way to explain every last detail and nuance of it when they could just, as you say, you know, if you have glide, you ignore
Yeah.
terrain and models to your point if it's lower down. Like that's a one sentence answer to a problem, and it's frustrating how often that isn't the case.
Yes. Especially see it, unfortunately, with indie games. And I hate to do this because I'm an indie game dev myself, but there's several indie games out there where you kind of go through it and you're like, wait, I need to read that rule through a few times to try to even comprehend what you're trying to communicate to
Yeah,
me.
they really needed an editor.
Yes.
Yeah.
They really needed an editor to say this doesn't make sense and reword it.
Or it
Yeah.
does, but do it shorter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. TLDR, right?
Exactly. And that's the hardest part of game design is you need to communicate your rules clearly as concisely as possible.
Yeah, and I've definitely played. I'm having a hard time thinking of a good war game example of a game that was elegant,
Mhm.
uh, that I would describe that way. But in some board games that are some of which are kind of hybrid war games, Scythe was
Hmm.
I which I was playing recently, and I was struck by the fact that there was a lot of rules, and it was seemed kind of complicated, but once we actually got into playing in the actual turn structure, and it was like, oh, I do my turn in 30 seconds, my opponent does their turn in 30 seconds. Once we kind of like got in, like once you got into the system, it was very intuitive, and you kind of understood how it worked, and how this was advancing whatever kind of strategy you were doing, and whatnot.
And
I
Dan, you were
think
talking about introducing OPR to that guy over the weekend, and you kind of
Yeah,
described the way it
yeah,
clicked with him. You described that as elegance.
OPR, and yeah, I mean, I like OPR in that I think that I think the OPR has some good elegant rules. I'm always interested though to see, for me, the big thing is, can it be played competitively? Because I don't view games being played competitively as a bad thing. I view that as a sort of a test about how good of a game is it actually, right? I think anyone can play any game and have fun with it, even a badly designed game. But the moment you try to actually make it a little more competitive, that's to me a test and a testament to how good is this game? How designed is it? Because now tournaments are on the line based on rules readings. I did want to hit one other purpose, and you kind of said something about rules designs being a purpose. And if there's one thing that you brought up, Kings of War, that I love about the game that's unique to it, it's the rule system is tailored for tournament play. How everything in the game, now it's getting away from this that I don't like it. How you don't do anything on your opponent's turn. On your opponent's turn, he rolls saves for you. He rolls everything, and you can just sit back. Now that's sort of changing now that you're getting all these frozen and all these other activation dice that I'm having to mark on things. But King's War's got no, but that is something that I think supports an elegancy to it. How at its kind of at its base frame, you can just sit back and watch your opponent do and sort of study. It makes the game a lot more efficient. Yeah.
So I would say that any more simple game is going to have an easier time achieving elegance.
Yeah.
That's certainly true. I mean, I'll use my river metaphor again. It's a lot easier to build a bridge that's 3 feet across than one that's 30 feet across. You know, um, so Kings does a pretty good job of it. I think it does have, like
I
you're
think now
talking
their
about.
bridge is full of holes right now, which is kind of one of the issues.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that one thing Kings has that isn't elegant is for new players, it has a few gotchas that you can kind of not know are a thing. Like
just a
the
few.
first time you are ever corkscrew charged in Kings of War is a negative play experience for almost everybody. the first time it happens to you. You're like, wait, and you're clipping my corner, you get to consider a flank?
I've heard that as people won't play Kings of War. Some people, a couple of people have told me that in the past. They're like, that happened to them, and they were literally like, "I'm not playing this game because of what's happening."
I can tell you,
it's stupid. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I can tell you, I'd be playing a lot more Kings of War if it did not have that rule.
I'm gonna be real cynical. It's in there because tournament players win tournaments with it, and they don't want to change it for that reason. And it's a huge barrier to new players. Shouldn't exist. It makes no, and it makes no sense. The people have tried to. Well, it's kind of it's abstract on the battlefield.
But aren't you sort of hitting on something where you're saying, because I loved you talked about Marvel Crisis Protocol, how you said the rules support reality and lore. Darth Vader. It's like, does that help the fact that if rules are incongruent with lore and reality, they just flow, right? It's like I'm sure rules for Darth Vader are much easier to understand because it is Darth Vader doing them, right?
Exactly. And that's what I was going to actually get to is, so I definitely think that the more clear something works, the more real it is, that verisimilitude kind of, does it feel like it should? So the corkscrew charge, the issue I have with it from a design perspective is it feels extremely game rather than war game.
Well, it literally only works because of the way centimeters transfer to inches in a certain like the way millimeter the way the conversion from millimeter to inches works gives you this thing that's only possible mathematically, to do. And the only reason people know to do it is because they've worked it out mathematically. So
exactly. And when you're thinking about a battlefield of my army of dwarves facing your army of orcs, and our battle lines have met, it's weird for a portion of my battle line to be like, no, yoink, I'm going to the side now, and I'm hitting these guys. And okay, if they could hit the front a bit and pile in that way, that makes sense. You're pushing in one area, but the fact it counts as a flank, it just doesn't feel like war. And I think one of the things that, Dan, you mentioned with MCP and Star Wars Legion that I like about it is the narrative. I think every war gamer has an element. The reason we play war games instead of just all playing chess all the time is because we like the narrative on the table. It's the reason why we're painting miniatures, so we can see these miniatures doing something special. And when those miniatures don't feel like they are that miniature anymore, that can really ruin an experience for someone. So if I were fielding Darth Vader and he was surprisingly cheap points-wise and would go down to Rebel blaster fire by turn 3 every single game, I'd be looking at him like, that's not Darth Vader. That doesn't make sense. But when I do field Darth Vader, what does he do? He has an extremely damaging lightsaber. He refuses to run. He walks everywhere. He's extremely slow. But he has infinite courage. He will never flee the battlefield. And any stormtroopers nearby, if they're starting to get panicked, he can just look at them and say, keep moving. And they move. They just keep going. They're not running. So I think that is an important element for all of us. And it actually does kind of connect to something you said earlier, Dan, about competitive kind of being a major test for a game. I would say yes-ish. It kind of depends on what the objective of the game is. So if the point of a game is to deliver a narrative experience, it doesn't mean it doesn't have competitive play. But, I then think of Blood Bowl. There are non-competitive teams in Blood Bowl. One of my favorite things to do back in the day is I would take an ogre team, but I wouldn't take any ogres. I would just field 16 snotlings. And they are utter trash. And they were the Snotling Avengers. My brother and I both did this. We both would run the Snotling Avengers. And I was there to watch my team get pasted into the ground. And that was a delight. And that's not competitive in any way, shape, or form. So I think competitive is a good general measure for most games, but there are a few outliers that are trying to achieve a specific narrative experience.
Do you think that simple games can be can have just as much tactical depth as more complex game, or do you really feel that you do have to get more complex to bring in that additional depth?
So, depth is a great thing to bring up. I would say that there is a point where simplicity loses depth, but that's when you're getting very, very basic. So, if every unit in your game is the same, like literally every single unit is the exact same guy, they hit on fours, they die on fours if they get hit, there's not a lot of depth there. Depth, tactical depth, is definitely something we want, but neither complexity or simplicity necessarily give depth. Because depth is the amount of options you have at the table. When you sit down to take your turn, do you actually have decisions, or is your turn kind of made for you? If it's made for you and you just roll the dice, you're like, well, I know what I do. I shoot the biggest, closest thing. I roll my dice, I see what happens. That's not very deep. It's not very interesting. Whereas if it's, what do I need to do? I can potentially try to deal some damage to that person, chip them down, take them out, and that could help me in the long term. Or I could pull back, hold this objective, try to secure that for the victory points. Or maybe this squad just needs to charge forward bravely into the face of that giant monster and die horribly next turn so it can't get as close to the rest of my line. That's a very simple option, but depth is, what are your options? Do you have options? Or if there's one right answer, your game isn't deep. So it's not just having options, but do they matter? Are they meaningful?
I really, it's funny. You really clarified for me what depth. I said depth, and I didn't understand what it meant. And just you saying that, options, for me at least, it really helps me sort of clarify. And I think that's why it's really great to like have you on it and like sort of make this a running thing, that you have a way of describing these nebulous concepts like depth in a way that helps me. Like, I understand what depth is now much better because you described it in that manner, So
Well, it's also kind of why you get that icky feeling when either you're playing or your opponent is playing a thing that just kind of plays itself, and you don't feel like your choices mattered. It's like, I'm just playing the old artillery, gunline spam. All I'm here to do is roll dice. My positioning doesn't really matter. My turn is about rolling dice and seeing what happens. And
Exactly.
and at that point, yeah, like you're not even, if your army kind of goes on autopilot. This is kind of where I've felt that Kings of War really went wrong in third edition because of some of the changes they made to the game. They introduced a lot more synergy focus rather than positioning focus. What you've wound up with is lists diversity has decreased. And you get basically armies that I feel like play themselves. Like you're a lot less focused on again, on your positioning, on your securing kind of these tactical lines. And that was what appealed to me of Kings of War initially was, finding kind of these options and like moving up and securing areas and finding these options for my attack, and then kind of, triggering things when it was ready. And now it feels like, okay, well, I've got this kind of core block here that all gets buffed from this guy. So I have to always keep this guy next to these three things here so that they're always affected by this buff, because that's the only way it works. And I'm trying to achieve this kind of this hypothetical numerical breakpoint in order to be victorious. And that numerical breakpoint's kind of the same no matter what I'm playing against. Like this is a problem, I think. And I know I'm ranting a little bit on Kings of War because it's
well, is that what Sam's hitting on? Because it's funny, and I'll let you speak, Jacob, but it's
Of
like
course.
Kings of War has added more complexity, but it seems to reduce depths. In other
Yeah,
words,
it's made it less deep
it's
though.
am I correct in
Yes.
that saying that, Jacob, that
I
increased
I would
complexity has
agree.
actually reduced your tactical options?
I would agree overall. Because like Sam says, it's now more about using these synergistic units, these buffers or debuffers to just kind of do the same predictable thing every game. And I think the thing that makes a game deep is can you sit down and think, I've played this game 10 times and I've played it 10 different ways with the same
Mm,
force.
that's good. Yeah.
Or do you sit down and say, I played this game 10 times and I kept putting this unit on the right flank and that unit on the left, and this was my core, and I marched forward and we stabbed each other. And again, there are games that are not deep that are still very fun. Um, but depth is very difficult to pull off, especially because you can have a deep game with units that are shallow. Like Kings of War originally, before I loved first and second edition Kings of War. It
Yeah.
was my
Yeah.
game for a long time. If I field a cannon, that's not a deep unit. You know what a cannon's going to do, right? It shoots stuff. But the positioning of the rest of my army, the way I use it with my other units, that was where depth came in. And when you remove creativity to my positioning and just say, this must be positioned with that, or you're at a detriment, you've removed some of the depth.
And it's I think it's a classic trap that games fall into, especially as they evolve. Whereas let's add more options to players and thus increase the the amount of things that they can do. But what ends up happening so often is we add more options, so the best options become more apparent.
We
And
also,
and so
as
you
we also
and,
as
yeah.
players, forget about all our options too. That
Mhm.
was one of my huge things that stopped me playing 40k ninth. Was there was no way I could remember every single thing that my army could do, and I'd always kick myself for having forgotten the best obvious whatever thing to do. They didn't add any depth; it just added complexity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do feel like 40K has become a little bit. Actually, there's this great video, Goobertown Hobbies. I'm not sure if you guys are
Yeah.
familiar.
Yeah. That's great.
He
Yeah.
recently released a video on he did a slow grow 40K league back in ninth edition. And he's like, I didn't put it up for years when I finally put it up. And he describes it, and I'm gonna have to paraphrase, I don't remember his exact words, but something along the lines of 40K is just me watching my opponent roll dice, hopeless to know what these dice are and how he modifies them. And then at the end, he tells me to pick up 6 models, and I do.
It's interesting that you brought up that Goobertown video because the guy I taught one page rules mentioned that. I think it's really hitting home mentioning that video. And he said, because I watched that video as well, and I'm already a one page rules guy. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
yay. But he said, the guy, and he quoted something that stuck with me. And this guy said, 40K is a lot more interaction with your dice box than it is with your opponent.
Hmm.
It's
Yes.
much more interactions with your book and your dice box. That's where the interaction is. It's between your dice box and rules, but it's very little interaction with your opponent.
Yes.
And one page rules. All games have things that could get better, but the interaction is a lot more with your opponent. So yeah.
And that's something you definitely want as well, is if your game is 2 players playing solitaire in turns, it's not very exciting.
No,
This is why
you may as well play it solitaire.
Yeah.
exactly.
And
This is
and
why
if you walk away from a game, this has been my experience recently with Kings of War, so I've kind of taken a step back from it. Is I last time I was at one of our local tournaments, my final game, I I don't think I could have won that, and I outplayed my opponent, and and he even admitted, like on certain years, I don't know if I could have won that game. Like it was so one-sided that I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And it was really just discouraging because it's like you know, I didn't even have fun with this. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
we would love to talk for, but
And I'm sure we could.
this is the reason. Yeah, this is the reason we want Jacob you to come back on, because I think you have really, one thing I think that you've done a lot is like for me, just personally, I think what my big takeaway is you've done such a great job at clarifying these nebulous terms that help me better understand what game design is. So maybe just close off on a last little bullet point here. Maybe give a couple of pointers to any potential game designers. What would you kind of close out this little session?
Okay, if you want to become a game designer, my first piece of advice is do not build your dream game first. Build small stuff first, because if you try to build your dream game right off the bat, it's going to become a nightmare instead of what you envisioned it as. The best thing you can honestly do to get the hang of game design is just take one of your favorite games and modify it in some way. If you're really into Gaslands, I know a bunch of people are really into Gaslands, buy those little Mario Kart cars instead of the standard Hot Wheels and convert it to be Mario Kart on the tabletop. Or another way you could do it would be take OPR, if you really like OPR, and try to come up with a variety of scenarios that change the way the game plays. If you start kind of in these smaller amounts, and then you go on to actually I'm going to design my own game complete. That's typically a better way to start. Of course, if you have a strong vision, go ahead and start bigger, but just know that that's like starting, I don't know, it's like starting calculus before you've finished all your algebra. It can be a little difficult. Now, if you're comfortable with being a little rough and tumble and fixing it as you go and having a long process on your game, go for it. But the more experience you get doing small stuff, the easier the bigger stuff becomes. And then the last thing I have for anyone who wants to do game design is a quote from Jake the dog from Adventure Time. Sucking at something is the first step to being sort of okay at something. And we all start sucking at something. So just keep making stuff, just keep doing it. And eventually your stuff is going to start looking like what you want it to look like. It took me a long time.
That's awesome. Bozz, any closing thoughts that you took away from this session?
Yes, absolutely there is. It is really cool. And I appreciate so much that you've been on a couple of times, Jacob, because it is so obvious listening to you that you've thought about this a lot. This isn't just something that you've off the cuff decided to dive into, and you know what you're talking about, and you can explain it in a way that is succinct and engaging, much like the rules of yours I've read so far, which bodes well for Headball, which I have high hopes for.
All right.
So just thanks, and yeah, you're really good at what you do, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bozz.
You do have the gift of gab when it comes to explaining these kind of concepts, which I know Dan touched on. It's really useful for all of us, I think.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
Yeah,
all that improv speech is paying off.
All right, thanks again, guys. Until next time, Sam.
Go where the game is good.
Any war game, anytime. Going where the game is good.